Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving straight into some absolutely massive, fundamentally life-altering concepts from the Honors Study Guide. We're going to briefly touch on Dr. Susan Edwards' brilliant core essay to the seventh generation, Inheritance and Legacy, and then we're going to spend a good amount of time really unpacking Theme 7. We're talking about legacy, our own mortality, and what exactly we leave behind when we're gone. It's deep stuff, but it's incredibly fascinating, so let's just get right into it. Okay, I want you to genuinely think about a kind of bizarre question for a second. Do you have any clue what your great-great-grandchildren are going to eat for breakfast on, say, a random Thursday in March? The author Amor Towles actually posed this incredibly specific question in his novel A Gentleman in Moscow. And, well, why ask something so unanswerable? Because it perfectly hits the nail on the head regarding just how utterly unpredictable the future of our legacy truly is. We literally have no idea how our daily habits, our biggest achievements, or our personal struggles are going to be perceived 3 generations from now, let alone 7. It really highlights the sheer mystery of time and, the kind of blind faith we need to have as we go about building our lives today. To try and wrap our heads around this giant, sprawling timeline, we can actually look at the musician Sarah Bareilles. In her song Chasing the Sun, she found this profound, almost fierce inspiration to live fully by, of all things, walking through a graveyard in the center of Queens. She was contemplating the names, the dates, and what she so beautifully described as the echo of heartbeats of the people buried there. Sitting there, sort of stuck between the living and the dead, she realized something huge. Looking backward at those who came before us is actually the single greatest catalyst for daring ourselves to move forward. The symphony of all those past lives is absolute proof that our current life is meant to be deeply, intensely meaningful. And that massive historical view of humanity leads us right into Section 1, the 7th generation principle. Now, this principle completely reorients how you look at the world. The 7th generation principle is an indigenous philosophy, deeply rooted in the Ojibwe and Haudenosaunee cultures. It emphasizes that we are intimately, undeniably connected to the very first people who ever walked the earth, while simultaneously being tied to those who won't even be born for another 7 generations. Think about that for a second. In this worldview, we aren't the end of the line. We aren't the main characters in the grand finale of history. We are simply the bridge, a vital, living, breathing bridge between our ancestors and our distant descendants. And as you might guess, being that bridge comes with some pretty heavy expectations. Tuscarora scholar and former Smithsonian Special Assistant Rick Hill Sr. frames it perfectly in this quote. He explains that this beautiful inheritance we've been given isn't just about what we get to consume or enjoy right now. It is a profound, honorable duty. You don't just show up to benefit from the sweat of your ancestors. You show up to work hard so that people centuries from now can enjoy the fruits of your labor. It's a complete 180-degree shift from a consumer mindset to a true legacy mindset. With that multi-generational timeline in our heads, we've got to figure out how to make our specific finite actions actually matter. Which brings us to Section 2, Chasing the Sun. So, how do we actually act day to day? Broadcaster Bill Moyers tackled this exact question after studying ancient generational tragedies, like the Greek play 7 Against Thebes. He looked at how literally every single generation has wrestled with destiny, inheritance, and legacy. And after all that intense historical analysis, Moyers concluded that his own personal legacy would be surprisingly simple. He was going to strive to make decisions based on love rather than fear. Because, look, if you don't know what your descendants are going to be eating for breakfast in 100 years, the absolute best thing you can pass down to them is a foundational ethic of love. And this brings up a fascinating tension. Humanity has always tried to build these monumental physical structures, think the pyramids, right, to try and outlast death and cement our memory. We desperately want to control how we're remembered. But going back to Amor Towles, he noted that fate ultimately hands down our legacy behind its back. We can build all the monuments we want, but we don't get to dictate how the future is going to interpret them. We literally can only control our actions and our choices today. All of this philosophy brings us to the real pivot of our explainer, Section 3, which focuses heavily on Theme 7, life and death. Theme 7 forces us to stare right at the unbreakable duality of life and death. On one side, you have the fierce, urgent beginning of life bursting into the world. On the other, the quiet, unavoidable finality of an urn. The core realization of this theme is that our awareness of that final urn is fundamentally what shapes the energy with which we live. Seriously, if we lived forever, the whole concept of a legacy would be completely meaningless, wouldn't it? It is exactly our mortality that gives our everyday actions their weight and their urgency. To dive deeper into this duality, the study guide highlights the work of researcher Jay Gier. Now, GR proposes a truly fascinating thesis. He argues that death actually imitates life. Basically, our wildly diverse cultural definitions of dying and grief aren't just random. They are direct mirrors of how we uniquely live, connect, and organize our societies. In short, we die in the exact same cultural context in which we live. And because humanity is this incredibly diverse global organism, we absolutely do not approach the end of the line in the same way. Let's look at Section 4, Cultural Views on Dying. Perfectly illustrating Gergeier's point, you can look around the world and see how different cultures inherit totally unique approaches to the end of life. For some cultures, death is marked by solemn, very quiet mourning. For others, like with the Day of the Dead, it is a vibrant, colorful, musical celebration of those who walked before us. These cultural expressions aren't just events. They are themselves a form of inherited legacy, passed down generation after generation to help us cope with our own finite timeline. So, the crucial takeaway from Juror's research is that acknowledging this cultural diversity and grief isn't just some dry academic exercise. It's absolutely vital to understanding the human experience. These practices, how we cry, how we celebrate, how we remember, are some of the most profound inheritances we get from our ancestors. They are literally the emotional tools handed down to us to process the ultimate mystery of life's end. Okay, so we know that life ends, and we know that different cultures process that ending differently. But to what extent does that idea of death actually impact the way we live our lives today? That's Section 5, How Death Shapes Life. Well, the short answer is it shapes absolutely everything. The awareness of our own mortality, the flickering, temporary nature of a candle, is exactly what pushes us toward the celebration of life. The shadow of death is the very thing that pushes us to create vibrant lives, to forge deep love, and to make meaningful connections in the terribly short time before our own candle burns out. Without the deadline, we simply wouldn't have the drive. And human beings rebel against that deadline in some pretty incredible ways. Our drive to leave a piece of ourselves behind takes many forms. On one hand, we have immediate, tangible legacies. The study guide tells the remarkable story of 23-year-old Sharday Walker. Her sudden passing led to an organ donation that physically saved the lives of 8 different people around the world. That is an instant, literal legacy of life. On the other hand, we have generational legacies, that intense human desire to create new offspring, pushing us to utilize everything from natural reproduction to advanced assisted technologies like IVF, just to make absolutely sure a part of our story continues. Both are profound, beautiful ways of rebelling against our own mortality. Through all of this deep philosophy, the cultural research, and the stark realities of life and death, the core message from this honors study guide remains wonderfully empowering. Passionately chase the sun. Like Amelia Earhart once said, the hardest thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. We are called to learn from the heartbeats of the past, to be fiercely tenacious in our present, and to consciously create the absolute best possible inheritance for those next 7 generations. Which leaves us with one final, deeply personal thought to chew on. Knowing that your time here is beautifully finite, knowing that you are the bridge, and knowing that your everyday actions will echo into a future you will never even get to see, I want to leave you with this ancient Ojibwe question. Ahandi Ejayaun. Where are you going? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparked your curiosity about the exact legacy you are building today.